Rocks tumbled, shouts pierced the mist, horses screamed in panic. The earth shook under armored feet, metal clanged against metal, then silence. A single scream broke the quiet, then another, and another. No one expected this, no one understood it. Thousands of knights, armed to the teeth, charging with precision, stopped dead. One by one they fell not to arrows, not to swords, something else, something unseen. Amid the chaos, a figure or many moved with uncanny coordination. Ordinary men, ordinary tools, yet the tide of battle was shifting. Panic spread faster than fire. Horses reared, commanders shouted, but control slipped away. Orders were ignored, plans unraveled. Every trained soldier had a choice: survive or vanish. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise ended. Silence swallowed the field. Bodies were gone, horses scattered, only questions remained. How could such a small force bring the mightiest knights of the age to their knees? And what secrets did the mountains keep that day, hidden from history? The year was 1315. Europe was a land of knights and kings, of sworn loyalty and relentless warfare. Tensions simmered across the Alps. Wealthy lords demanded obedience, while small villages clung to independence. At the heart of this storm was a narrow pass, a route that connected valleys but also served as a trap. Controlling it meant controlling movement, trade, and survival itself. The knights, proud and battle-hardened, had long believed victory was their birthright. Armored and disciplined, they underestimated the terrain, the peasantry, and the unexpected. Meanwhile, the local villagers, farmers, herders, and tradesmen, lived under the constant threat of raids and conscription. Their lives were disciplined in a different way: rhythm of the seasons, labor, and survival. Yet beneath this apparent calm, fear simmered. Winter had been harsh, supplies were low, suspicion ran high. The slightest provocation could spark violence. In this tense landscape, alliances were fragile. Rumors spread like wildfire. Every hill, every forested slope became a potential stage for disaster. The stage was set for an encounter that no chronicler could fully explain. And when the day came, ordinary lives collided with the forces of a kingdom, and the results were beyond comprehension. They were not knights. They were not trained soldiers. They were peasants, farmers, herders, and craftsmen, ordinary men whose lives had been shaped by toil, hunger, and survival. Yet in their ordinariness lay a quiet strength that would soon challenge the mightiest warriors of their age. Morning in the alpine villages began long before the sun rose. The men woke to the cold bite of mountain air, their hands stiff from work and weather. They tended fields, fed flocks, chopped wood, and repaired fences. Their lives were disciplined, but not in the way of armies. Their discipline was born of necessity, of knowing that a missed day's work could mean famine. Every day demanded effort, precision, and endurance. The peasants' training was unintentional yet relentless. Carrying sacks of grain up steep slopes strengthened shoulders. Chopping wood sharpened timing and coordination. Herding cattle taught patience, quick reactions, and spatial awareness. They were accustomed to reading the land, knowing where the snow would accumulate, where the ground would crumble, where a falling branch could signal danger. Their muscles remembered patterns of movement that no soldier could teach. And yet, despite their strength, fear ran deep in their veins. The world beyond the villages was dangerous. Knights and lords demanded obedience. Raids were common. Taxes and levies could sweep away a family's entire harvest. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the careful act of moving forward despite it. In the evenings, they gathered near hearths and fires, swapping stories and lessons. They shared knowledge passed down for generations, where the paths were safe, which cliffs could hold a hidden trap, which rocks would slide if dislodged. Every story contained a lesson, every tale a warning, and every warning hinted at survival. Emotion ran through these men like water through a mountain stream, loyalty to family, to village, to community. They were bound by shared struggle, and in their bonds they found strength. Unlike the knights whose loyalty was sworn to distant kings or abstract codes of honor, these men's allegiances were tangible. They fought for what they could touch: their homes, their families, their way of life. They trained in silence, not with banners or drills, but with observation and anticipation. They moved like shadows among the rocks, practicing the art of concealment and ambush without even nomming it. Every step, every glance, every gesture was precise, informed by experience rather than command. Children watched and mimicked their fathers, absorbing instinctual knowledge that could tip the scales of battle. Discipline in their lives was harsh, though it came with no formal penalties. A failed harvest or a missed warning could mean starvation. A misjudged river crossing or a careless climb could mean death. Their education was survival. Their teachers were the mountains themselves. Over years, this forged mental toughness that could rival the most disciplined knights, even if no one outside the valleys could recognize it. Yet even as their skills grew, doubt and uncertainty lingered. These men were aware of the approaching knights. They had heard rumors of the army's size, numbers that could crush entire villages. Many nights they sat awake, imagining the chaos that could descend upon them. Some whispered prayers, others gripped axes and sharpened spears in silence. The air was heavy with anticipation and unease. But amid the fear there was also courage. Ordinary courage, quiet and persistent. They did not seek glory, banners, or fame. They sought survival, not just for themselves, but for their families, their neighbors, and the villages that had stood for generations. They understood that on a certain day, their strength, knowledge, and unity might be all that stood between life and death. And so, as the fateful morning approached, the peasants prepared in small, deliberate ways. Rocks were moved into place. Spears and clubs were sharpened. Trails and paths were studied until every possible movement was memorized. They shared tasks, reinforced weaknesses, and observed each other with careful scrutiny. Every man knew the role he would play, but no one yet understood the magnitude of what was coming. In this preparation, there was a strange calm. The calm of people who know danger is near but cannot change it. The calm of those who have accepted that survival is a collective effort, that every action matters, and that failure is not an option. These were not heroes by the world's standard, yet in the quiet, disciplined strength of ordinary men, a force was forming, a force that, when tested, would bend the expectations of an entire era. And in their eyes, flickering in the light of dawn, there was resolve. Not the arrogance of knights, not the bravado of trained soldiers, but something far older, a primal, unwavering determination to endure. They were ready. Not yet victorious, not yet tested, but ready, and the mountains watched. In the days before the clash, something in the mountains felt wrong. The villagers noticed it first. Birds that usually filled the morning skies with song were gone. Not a single crow, not a flutter of wings. The forests, alive and noisy just weeks before, had fallen silent. A heavy quiet pressed down, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The shepherds reported strange behavior in their flocks. Sheep huddled against cliffs, as though sensing danger invisible to human eyes. Goats refused paths they had traveled for years. Even the dogs, usually alert and loyal, whimpered and turned their ears toward nothing. Riders sent to scout the approaching knights returned with unusual reports. They spoke of mist clinging to the valley floor, of shadows moving where no person or animal should have been. They described narrow passes that seemed to shift overnight, rocks that had fallen in strange patterns, and pathways that suddenly disappeared beneath their feet. The knights themselves began to sense the unease. Camps that should have been lively and orderly were quiet, even tense. Messages between commanders went unanswered or arrived incomplete. Orders shouted across the field were met with silence, as if the valley absorbed sound itself. Some reported seeing strange figures in the distance, glimpses of people moving unnaturally fast between trees, appearing and disappearing with impossible speed. Others dismissed them as tricks of light and shadow, the imagination fueled by fear. But in whispered conversations around campfires, soldiers spoke of a growing dread they could not name. Supplies began to vanish mysteriously. Packs of food, carefully prepared and counted, were found empty. Horses, healthy and trained, grew skittish, refusing to step into familiar enclosures. Armor and weapons shifted overnight as though moved by unseen hands. Each small, inexplicable event seemed unconnected, but together they wove a web of anxiety that tightened around the knights. Even within the villages, the peasants felt it. The mountains seemed restless, shifting subtly underfoot. Rocks loosened without cause, winds carried odd sounds, and the earth hummed faintly, like the warning of an unseen predator. They spoke little of these signs, sharing them only in muted whispers around fires, for fear of alarming their families. And then, on the eve of the confrontation, the tension reached a peak. A heavy fog rolled down the valley, thick and unnatural, clinging to every tree and stone. Birds, long silent, began to call once, but in sharp, alarming notes that set hearts racing. Wolves howled, though none had been near in months. Even the rivers seemed uneasy, their waters churning with a restless, unfamiliar energy. Knights and villagers alike noticed that sounds carried differently in the mist. Shouts echoed strangely, making it impossible to judge distance. Commands shouted across the valley arrived too late, or not at all. Scouts returned pale-faced, muttering about cliffs that weren't where they remembered, rocks that appeared in paths moments before, and the unsettling sensation that the land itself had betrayed them. For the peasants, these were signs to prepare. For the knights, signs were warnings ignored. Confidence, arrogance, and past victories blinded them to the subtle messages of the mountains. And yet, every uneasy glance, every missed signal, every unnatural silence added to the growing sense of foreboding. It was as if the mountains themselves were watching, calculating. The land, the weather, the animals, even the men, everything conspired to create unease. The tension was tangible, pressing down like the weight of the sky. Even those with iron nerves felt it, though none could explain why. And in the deepest corners of the valley, in the hidden alcoves where the peasants had prepared their positions, there was a strange calm. They moved silently, placing rocks, sharpening spears, knotting the shadows. Every unnatural sound, every strange movement of the land was absorbed into their knowledge. The stage was set. A storm of fear, anticipation, and tension hung in the air. Something was coming, something no one could predict. And as the final night fell over the valley, a single question remained unanswered. What force could truly turn ordinary men into an unstoppable danger against the mightiest warriors of their age? The morning of the confrontation broke cold and gray. Mist clung to the valley floor, curling around the rocks and trees like a living thing. The knights marched into the pass, banners snapping, armor glinting, weapons ready. Their numbers were immense, 9,000 strong. Confidence radiated from their ranks, every man certain that this would be a straightforward victory. Yet beneath the mist, ordinary men waited. Peasants, farmers, herders, tradesmen, hidden among the cliffs and rocks, poised for an event that would challenge all expectations. Their weapons were simple, sharpened axes, wooden poles, and heavy stones. Yet in the hands of those who knew the land intimately, simplicity became a formidable advantage. A rumble echoed through the valley. At first it was subtle, a distant sound that could have been wind or shifting rocks. Then it grew. The earth seemed to tremble beneath the advancing knights. Horses snorted and reared, sensing danger the riders could not see. Metal clanged as armor shifted, shields jostled, and commanders shouted orders that were swallowed by the mist. From hidden positions, the peasants began their assault, not in a charge, not with a clash of swords, but with the precision of men who had rehearsed every possibility. Rocks loosened from cliffs and tumbled down with deafening crashes. Horses screamed as boulders struck them or blocked their path. Knights stumbled, rank upon rank faltering. Panic spread faster than fire. The sounds of confusion filled the valley. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Armor rang against stone. Orders went unheeded. A single command echoed only to be met with silence. The valley itself seemed to conspire against the knights, every slope, every cliff, every boulder working with the peasants' knowledge. Yet the peasants moved like shadows, calm, coordinated, unseen. They struck at weak points, drove obstacles into paths, and retreated before the enemy could respond. Every movement was designed to exploit the terrain, to turn the knights' strength against them. The mist swallowed action and amplified fear. Confusion reigned supreme. Horses reared uncontrollably. Cavalry formations broke apart. Armored men slid down slopes, caught in rocks and mud. Weapons fell from hands, shields collided uselessly. And through it all, the valley remained eerily quiet except for the sharp, jarring noises, the crack of falling boulders, the shrill scream of a horse, the barked commands lost to the fog. Knights tried to regroup, forming circles, shouting at each other to hold the line. But every attempt failed. The ground beneath them betrayed them. Horses refused paths they had crossed before. Riders misjudged distances as echoes distorted reality. Panic became contagious, infecting even the bravest men. The peasants remained invisible yet omnipresent. They moved from shadows to rocks, exploiting every advantage of the landscape. Spears and poles blocked narrow passes. Rocks and logs fell in orchestrated chaos. Every action seemed random, but together they created a perfectly controlled disruption. Minutes passed like hours. The knights' coordination collapsed entirely. Commands went unanswered, units became separated, and what had been a disciplined army became scattered, stumbling, and afraid. Horses bolted. Men slipped into crevices. The once mighty formations dissolved into disarray. And then abruptly silence fell. The valley swallowed the sound, leaving only mist and fog. Smoke from fires or torches drifted lazily through the trees, but no shouts echoed. No metal clanged. No hoofbeats pounded. The chaos had vanished as suddenly as it began. The knights were gone, or at least their presence was erased from the battlefield. The peasants emerged cautiously from their hidden positions, surveying the aftermath. The valley was quiet. Rocks lay where they had fallen, paths blocked, but the scale of what had happened seemed impossible. The numbers didn't add up. The trained soldiers, so many and so well armed, had disappeared, or retreated in confusion so complete that no one could explain it. Survivors later described it as if the mountains themselves had risen against the knights. Some claimed rocks rolled with a mind of their own. Others spoke of shadows moving unnaturally, of the ground shaking under invisible forces. Every account conflicted with the next. Yet one fact remained consistent. The peasants had done what seemed impossible. In the immediate aftermath, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Horses wandered aimlessly, armor lay scattered, and banners drooped as if deflated by some unseen hand. The peasants stood among it, all ordinary men, now witnesses to extraordinary events. They had not sought glory, only survival, and yet the result was something far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Questions hung in the air like fog. How had 1,500 men, armed with only simple tools, managed to scatter 9,000 trained knights? How had the valley itself seemed to rise against them? And what force, natural or otherwise, had contributed to the chaos? No one knew the answer. Not that day, not for decades, and perhaps not ever. The battlefield fell silent, leaving only the mist and the echo of impossible events. The incident would be recorded, whispered, debated, but the full truth remained elusive. The mountains held their secrets. The valley, witness to an event that defied reason, waited in quiet anticipation of the next visitor. And in that silence, a question lingered. How could ordinary men turn nature to reign, and fear itself into a weapon against the greatest warriors of the age? The day after the valley fell silent, disbelief hung heavier than the mist ever had. Messengers hurried along mountain paths, carrying frantic reports of the impossible. Knights were missing, formations had collapsed, and the peasant force, ordinary men, remained seemingly unscathed. Commanders of the approaching army refused to believe what had happened. Scouts were dispatched to comb the valley. Every inch was searched. The cliffs, the hidden alcoves, the forested slopes, nothing. Not a single knight remained in place, and yet there was no sign of a large-scale retreat. Where had 9,000 men gone? Survivors were interrogated. Some described chaos so complete it defied reason. Commands shouted were swallowed by echoes. Horses bolted in impossible directions. Rocks and trees appeared to move as if guided by unseen hands. But each testimony differed. Some claimed orderly withdrawal. Others described panic so total it was unimaginable. Each account contradicted the last. Villagers and peasants were questioned too. They spoke cautiously, aware that too much information might draw attention from outside lords. Many claimed they had done nothing extraordinary. Others offered cryptic observations: paths blocked, rocks dislodged, strategic advantage taken. Yet even their accounts were inconsistent, as if the event had shifted in memory as it unfolded. Meanwhile, official reports from the knights' command reflected confusion at every level. Many documents were incomplete or missing entirely. Some reports, detailing unit positions and losses, had been sealed. Others contradicted each other. Casualty numbers were puzzlingly low for an army that had supposedly faced utter chaos. Critical officers and commanders were unaccounted for in surviving logs. Historians later noted the odd absence of detailed records for this battle. Orders disappeared, correspondences vanished, and letters describing the events were either never written or lost in suspicious circumstances. Some speculated that lords had deliberately erased information, perhaps embarrassed by their forces' failure. Others suggested there had been an effort to prevent the spread of knowledge about tactics the peasants had used. Despite the meticulous searches, nothing definitive emerged. No mass grave. No signs of captured knights. Only scattered equipment, helmets, shields, a few abandoned weapons remained to suggest the scale of what had occurred. And even these artifacts provided little clarity. Many items appeared undisturbed, as though the knights had simply evaporated. Whispers began to circulate. Some spoke of the valley itself conspiring against the army, as if nature had intervened. Others suggested secret alliances, unseen forces, or extraordinary strategy on the part of the peasants. But these remained rumors, impossible to confirm. Witnesses who might have clarified details were either unrecorded, silenced, or gone. The searches continued for weeks. Scouts ventured into every ravine, every crevice, every overhanging cliff. They called out for survivors. They shouted names. They set fires and listened for echoes, yet the valley offered no answers. Only silence returned. Even outside observers were puzzled. Neighboring villages and lords received letters describing strange events in the past, but the details were vague, incomplete, or contradictory. No one could establish a consistent timeline. No one could explain how the peasants had resisted, how the knights had faltered, or why the records were so fractured. And then the official narrative emerged, carefully controlled and strangely uniform. Victory or defeat was reported differently depending on the source. The knights' losses were minimized. The peasants' role was understated. Many files were classified, locked away, or destroyed. Scholars who studied later would note the glaring omissions, missing names, unexplained gaps, and contradictions that defied logical reconciliation. Yet despite this secrecy, one undeniable fact remained. The valley had witnessed something extraordinary. Ordinary men, armed with simple tools and knowledge of the terrain, had done what trained knights could not. The aftermath, shrouded in missing reports and inconsistent testimony, only deepened the mystery. And so the search ended, not with clarity but with questions. The mountains kept their secrets and the records offered more confusion than answers. Orders, reports, and testimonies existed, yet none could be fully trusted. And while historians would debate the event for centuries, the truth remained elusive, hidden behind fog, rocks, and silence. One question lingered, unanswered. What really happened in the valley, and why had so many witnesses and records disappeared? Centuries have passed, yet historians, strategists, and curious minds alike continue to debate the events in Morgarten. How could a few hundred peasants, armed with little more than simple tools, outmaneuver and scatter thousands of trained knights? There are several theories, each compelling, each incomplete, each leaving as many questions as answers. Some scholars argue that the mountains themselves were the decisive factor. The narrow pass, the steep cliffs, the unstable rocks, all could be exploited by those who knew them intimately. Ordinary men, familiar with every slope and every hidden crag, could have created ambushes that rendered the knights' numbers meaningless. Rocks dislodged at the right moment, logs placed to block paths, and uneven terrain could have broken formations and caused panic. Yet even this explanation has contradictions. Some contemporary maps show the pass as wide and manageable, and later accounts indicate knights had traversed it safely in other campaigns. If terrain alone was enough, why had similar ambushes not succeeded elsewhere? And how could the sheer psychological effect, the terror, the disorientation, be fully explained by geography alone? Another explanation invokes nature itself. Perhaps a sudden landslide, rockfall, or mist disoriented the knights. Weather could have shifted in an instant, creating fog so thick it rendered commands useless. Some records speak of unusual seismic tremors in the region around that time, though evidence is sparse. But even this theory has holes. Survivors described days of fine weather before the engagement. Landslides cannot explain the coordination of the peasants, nor why the knights seemed paralyzed in fear rather than simply dispersed. And if natural events were responsible, why do local accounts suggest the peasants acted strategically, exploiting opportunities that seem to appear almost supernaturally? A third theory emphasizes cunning and psychological advantage. Perhaps the peasants intentionally manipulated sound, sight, and movement to create confusion. Shadows, sudden noises, falling rocks, and unexpected obstacles could have amplified fear in the knights' ranks. Ordinary men, using instinct and knowledge of human behavior, may have sown chaos deliberately. Yet this theory also raises questions. Could peasants with no formal training truly manipulate an army of 9,000 knights? Could fear alone scatter forces so disciplined, so armored, so experienced? And if so, why were these techniques not documented, taught, or replicated in later conflicts? Finally, some historians suggest there were forces at play that never reached the record books, alliances, secret orders, or events deliberately erased from history. Some documents were classified, letters disappeared, witnesses vanished. Could there have been instructions or guidance from unknown benefactors, or even a coordinated plan by unseen leaders within the villages? This theory is both tantalizing and frustrating. The absence of evidence is often cited as evidence itself. Files erased, records redacted, names crossed out, all suggest that something powerful, inconvenient, or embarrassing was deliberately hidden. But without proof, this theory remains speculation, a shadow of what may have occurred. Each theory has merit, yet none fully explains the magnitude of what happened. Terrain alone, nature, strategy, and hidden forces all play a role, but no single explanation satisfies the historical record. Even today, contradictions persist. Accounts differ, numbers don't add up. And inconsistencies in surviving documents suggest a deeper mystery. What is certain is this: ordinary men, armed with knowledge, courage, and survival instinct, accomplished the extraordinary. Whether aided by terrain, fortune, fear, or secrets lost to time, the outcome defied expectation. And the most haunting truth: we may never know the full story. Some witnesses were silenced, some records destroyed, some forces, perhaps, remain deliberately obscured. The Battle of Morgarten is remembered, studied, and debated, but the hidden truths linger, just beyond reach, whispering questions to anyone willing to listen. What really happened in that valley? And why was it allowed to remain a secret for centuries? The Battle of Morgarten remains one of history's most perplexing mysteries. On that foggy morning, ordinary men defied expectation, strategy, and the might of thousands of trained knights. And yet, the full truth has never emerged. Records are incomplete, witnesses disappeared, files were erased, reports contradict one another. Even centuries later, historians struggle to reconcile the accounts. Was it the terrain, a sudden natural disaster, the cunning of peasants, or forces deliberately hidden from view? Perhaps it was a combination of all, or something entirely unknown. What is clear is that the peasants, armed with little more than knowledge of their land and determination, accomplished something extraordinary. They turned mountains, rocks, and fear itself into weapons. And in doing so, they reminded the world that power is not always measured in numbers or armor, but in courage, cunning, and resolve. Yet the valley keeps its secrets. The mist returns each dawn, the rocks remain where they fell, and the mountains whisper of a day that defied explanation. The knights, once proud and confident, vanished from history as abruptly as they disappeared from the past. The ordinary men returned to their fields, silent witnesses to events that history could only hint at, never fully record. And so the question lingers, one that has haunted generations. What truly happened in Morgarten? How did the smallest, simplest force achieve the impossible, and why has the story been shrouded in mystery for so long? Perhaps the answers are buried beneath stones, hidden in erased records, or held in the memories of those long gone. Perhaps they will never be known. Share your thoughts, share your theories, because some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only pondered. And in pondering, we keep history alive and Morgarten's secrets ever present in our imagination.